Hello and welcome back to Dublin City, and we are in the purple chairs yet again, and we have a very special guest on today called Elaine Butler, and she's from the Circular Design Institute, which is for me fascinating, and that's why I wanted Elaine to come in, because what she does is very interesting. There's a lot of misnomers about the way the whole system works, so she's going to put us straight. So Elaine, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me. Delighted
Great
to be here.
See. And the purple chairs is a bit of a thing here, right? So you'll probably tell me where they came from and where they should have come from. So anyway, circular economy.
Yes, well, there's a buzz around the circular economy at the moment, particularly Europe have it in their sights. They want to be as circular as possible because 55% of the carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions that we put into the atmosphere, we're hoping we'll be able to tackle them through the circular economy. Because even if we move all of our energy production to renewables, it actually only takes 45% of the greenhouse gas emissions out of the atmosphere. So we need the circular economy to take the other 55% out. And the circular economy is a very fancy term for something that we're probably very familiar with and was commonplace in Europe, right up until, I'd say, the 1950s. It's the idea of, there's 4 principles that underpin the circular economy. It is about minimising the use of resources, so you're reducing the amount of materials or energy or water you use in the first instance. It's about designing out waste, or in the first, instead of finding uses for it, to try and design it so you don't create any waste, or you create as little as possible. And then it's about keeping materials in use for as long as possible. So that's either through repair, refurbishment, remanufacturing, repurposing, and then recycling. So you're feeding it back into production cycles. And then the last one, which often gets neglected because it's quite a tricky area to tackle, is regenerating natural systems, so that when you have a manufacturing process or some sort of service, that whatever you do, it's not just relying on the ecosystem to fix your problems, like composting plastic. It's doing something that is actually helping the ecosystem, so it's better as a result of your activities. So there are 4 very simple principles, and that underlines the circular economy. So it's not rocket science, although achieving it can be, isn't always straightforward.
Yeah, and so, but ultimately we've complicated everything then, haven't we, in the last 50, 80 years, I suppose? Well,
we haven't in one way. We've complicated things for achieving the circular economy because we've made everything linear. So we've simplified manufacturing processes so that, something gets made wherever and gets sent to the next person, gets sent to the next person, sent to the next person. And because those chains are very long and they stretch across the globe, it makes it really hard to send the product or material at the end of its life back into manufacturing, because it doesn't make sense to send something halfway across the globe to do it all over again. So that's what's making it tricky. It's sort of our global supply chains. We've made it hard to be more sustainable, but successive governments and academics and businesses are doing their best to try and, to square that circle and make it easy again.
And so in terms of, because companies are under pressure now. The spotlight is on. So in terms of what you do, your ultimate goal with these businesses, correct me if I'm wrong, is to really go down to the nuts and bolts. And it's a future process, really, isn't it? For you to go and see their supply chains all the way down in what they do, and then, but it's a long term.
Well, it does take time because, like you've pointed out, we actually, we've spent a long time getting to where we're at, and the way everything is set up. We're designed for the linear system. And when I generally work with people who make or sell physical goods. And currently, when you sell something, you're not responsible for it once it's sold. It goes to the customer and then they have to deal with it. And in the circular economy, that's going to change. We've already seen extended producer responsibility schemes like with the WE, where those who make electric goods have to have some responsibility for it at the end of its life cycle. And that's going to be extended to more and more products. And so companies are going to be involved in a product's life for longer, and they're going to have to change how they operate in order to deal with that. And it is a long process. I say to companies now, okay, the legislation is coming from Europe. There's going to be huge changes over the next 5 years. And at the moment, people are starting to pay attention to this and wonder how it applies to their business. And I'm always recommending that they start the process of gathering the information, because when the legislation comes in, it's quite a long process to find out where your suppliers are and to start talking to them about alternatives and pricing alternatives and testing alternatives. Now you have the time to do it. But in a couple of years' time, you may not have the time. So do it. And you also will probably be paying increased levies. So better to invest the money you have now into that process through staff hours or whatever, than have to be shelling out money in carbon taxes and levies that's going to take you away from your ability to do research and development.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's the same with cars. They have systems now, end of life, you have to pay levies and stuff like that. But I mean, the message for you and for us here today is that start looking at this.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately you're going to have to, and then the bills and the levies will come in and you'll have to pay just to, you'll be running to catch up basically.
Yeah, there's a key piece of legislation that's probably going to come into Ireland in 2027, which seems far off, but it went out for consultation last year. They're drafting the legislation this year. And furniture, which is the area that I focus on a lot, is one of the first industries they're going to look at, as well as textiles. Some of the heavy hitters, the heavy polluters, well, they're not heavy polluters, but they cause a lot of problem for governments because they tend to create bulky items that they have to deal with. So they're going to be the first product types that are going to be looked at. And as a result of that, so in the extent, it's the piece of legislation is called the Eco Design Sustainable Products Regulation. And as part of that, companies are going to have to report on the repairability of the product. And there's a suggestion that in order to encourage customers to buy a more sustainable product at the tills, which is when we make our decision, there'll be levies applied to the price of the product. So we already have, you might be contributing to the WE scheme, when you're buying your electrical goods, and it's factored into the price. But they're talking about doing eco-modulated levies, which means that if your product is easy to repair, made with recycled material, and has other circular strategies applied to it, that your levy will be lower. Okay. So if you're not prepared for this and it comes in, you could see reduced sales at the till, and then increased levies, and you're scrambling to form relationships with suppliers that other companies may have done already. Yeah. So you're at the back of the queue. Yeah. So I think companies do really need to start working on it now to try and find out where they should be targeting their efforts. But also, I think one of the key things is we talk about circularity in terms of the technical aspects and the processes, like, how to recycle material back in, how to make something, more energy efficient. But it's really important to remember the customer in all of that. Most customers want to be able to keep their items out of landfill or incineration at the end of its use cycle. And so if you can take it back and recycle it back into your products, you're going to generate customer loyalty that another company isn't. So I think there's lots of opportunity for companies to boost their sales by getting ahead of the circular economy. And that's, I think, something that a lot of times is neglected in the conversation.
And like you said, a lot of companies now, and certainly we're the same, and it's the reason we're doing this, it's for the customer looking in, and it's for the community. So if you can produce a product, like you said, that the customer feels good about, there's a brand, they get used to that with the brand, they start loving the brand because of what you're actually showing the customer that you care all the way down the line, which is a very important thing, because it's like with reusable cups, all that kind of stuff. People love to feel that they're doing something in the right way.
And they want companies to support them, because I think an awful lot of people have tried and they've realised how difficult it can be to be sustainable in the world that we currently live in. And really, companies can't do everything because they're only on their own. And that's the other thing about the circular economy. Companies have to usually work in collaboration with other companies in order to become more circular. But they're in a much better position to deliver sustainability than the customer, who really has influence, but only in their buying power And that's only when there's alternatives. So, I mean, all of the research is showing that customers want to be more sustainable, but they want the companies they buy from to help them to do that. And so people are horrified when their sofa at the end of, well, like they've moved house or the sofa doesn't serve their needs anymore. It's perfectly fine. And the only place for it, unless you can resell it, which is really hard to do, the only place for it is in a skip.
Yeah.
Like, and something that would have cost you a few €1,000 possibly, you're putting it in a skip because you cannot find a home from it. And people don't like that feeling. And so if there's a company that's will take it back and maybe recover it and resell it, it makes them feel better about working with that company.
But does the customer lose the connection when puts it into the skips and forgets about it and never thinks about where it actually goes?
Some people do. Yeah, I think less and less people do because I think we're aware that there's an impact of everything we do. But there will always be people who just want to pay someone to take it away and they don't have to think about it. But I think that percentage of people is getting smaller and smaller. And also it'll be reflected in the cost that people are paying. So if you're buying, let's say, a sofa, and there's no take-back service at the end, no recycled material in it, it's not designed for repair, you may pay an additional €500 on it in comparison to another one that is designed to be more circular. And so even if for customers who don't care, it'll be made apparent to them at the point of purchase.
Yeah, because I think that's happening now. I think it's like electric cars, and we've a lot of experience in that in terms of people are starting to ask those questions, just more, where's the car made? And like, it's the same in an electric car. Look, you're still, in general, plugging it into your fossil fuel house. You know, the picture isn't fully complete, but it's the same as this. You have to start somewhere. And it's an education piece. We do a lot of education with the cars. And it's like what we're talking about here. People just need to know the actual answers. Like we were talking about, the misinformation out there is quite phenomenal on different aspects. Sustainability is kind of a buzzword now, but we really need to understand where our products are going, where they come from, etc., etc. And then when people have the education, then they can make their decision based on the full picture as opposed to...
I think that I totally agree with you. And I think the challenge for companies is to capture that information and deliver it to the customer in a manner that they can comprehend and use.
Comprehend is the thing.
And I think that, like, for, you know, the citizen, the individual, it's more of a story they want. They don't want to be bamboozled by, you know, carbon savings and things like that. That doesn't mean anything to them unless you sort of, you know, compare it to something else that is relatable. But businesses, and especially like if somebody's making a product that goes to the construction industry does want hard figures. It wants to know how much carbon, you know, was used, you know, what was the profile of the energy that might have been used to make it. And so different companies need to, I think it's good to record all the information, but then to test different ways of communicating it for different audiences. I think that's really important. And I think if you do a good job of that, you generate trust between you and your customer, and you become the company that the customer will go to because they know that you're going to tell them is, you know, they're not going to be bamboozled by jargon. It's going to be clear and concise. And you're also going to, if it's a business to business, you're going to give the company the information they need to satisfy their shareholders or customers or their clients, you know. Transparency is massive though, isn't it? Yeah, and trust and credibility and being transparent about where it's not perfect, I think is so important because then it engenders trust about the aspects you are saying. Yeah, because look, like anything, it's like we talked earlier about diets and stuff, you know, you can have your fad 6 weekers, but what happens on week 8 and 10? As the same with this, it's not going to happen overnight. No. And that's why... But if you say, listen, we've done this and this, we need to do this, this and this, it just creates that. And the bigger companies that do it, smaller companies will do it, and it's a knock-on effect all the way down, all the way to the customer and back up. And that's ultimately the game. Yeah, although interestingly, I find big companies are doing less than the smaller companies. I think smaller companies can be more nimble. They also have, I find, a better connection with their customers, like they know how to communicate things better. I've been involved with some multinationals and really they're just tinkering around the edges, you know, and they have the resources and they have all of the information they need to move, but they're like they're like big cruise ships. I was going to say the Titanic.
Yeah,
I always use
great
that
now.
example, but the Titanic's not a good example. But you know, like they're like big tankers, and when they're trying to turn, they turn really
can't,
slowly, and they can have their lunch stolen by more nimble companies that come up and can do this, and who are generally better at creating those collaborative networks that are needed for circularity, something that the big multinationals don't tend to be able to do as well currently. So I wouldn't be afraid, even if you're a small, medium company, I think there's an awful lot that you can do that can secure your future. Secure your supply chain by reusing materials, secure your customer base by being ahead of other companies and communicating in an honest, transparent way. And then also secure your revenue streams, because as there's going to be more taxes and levies, you can't really just rely on selling, you know, more of X, more reusable bottles, whatever. You have to make revenue in other ways, because we're trying to decouple energy growth from the use of materials. And that's something that small companies tend to be very good at, because they're more entrepreneurial in their spirit, whereas larger companies are very good at maintaining what they do, but really bad at changing what they do or their main business model.
Yeah, because they've been doing it for tens and tens of years. And in terms of, so like I was saying about my shoes, Vivo Barefoot are made from recycled bottles.
Brilliant.
So, and then when we were talking, people have this notion that recycled stuff should be cheaper.
Yeah.
That's a misdemeanor, isn't it? Big time.
It may in the future, but oftentimes to recycle material takes quite a lot of people hours to do it.
Because you need to bring it back.
Well, that's one of the issues now. And the thing is, like, China is actually phenomenally good at recycling materials, and they have very little waste because they have networks of manufacturers. And so if one company has an excess of something, usually there's a company somewhere within a small radius that can use it. So, and China is one of the few countries in the world that has had a circular economy law since 2015. So they're very advanced in some aspects of circular economy. But there are people hours involved in a lot of recycling. But as we start to use recycling services more, or repurposing or remanufacturing any of the circular strategies, there'll be more investment in the infrastructure and the technology to automate it. Right. And then it will become less expensive. It's like anything that's transitionary. There's always, and that's why you have governments investing in this area to see what's feasible, to test the uneconomical boundaries. And then what you get is industry coming in who will start taking it on when you can see there's a potential for commercialisation. Yeah, because again, same with electric cars, because they're expensive now in general terms. And as development gets better and more efficient, they become cheaper and cheaper. And then mass market, it'll go to the mass market eventually. But so the other misdemeanor then, so there's the quality. What about the quality in terms of, I remember a few years ago, McDonald's changed their straws. Do you remember that? Oh, paper straws, yes, I do.
They were useless.
Yeah.
They were useless. So like stuff like that. But that's all, again, they're trying something that didn't work. That was it.
And I think that we have time and space now to pilot these things. And really, there's no reason for that to have happened. There's lots of alternatives to paper for single-use straws. And they should have tested it in smaller cafes until they found a product that worked and then rolled it out. And that's what I say to companies. You'll never know what's going to go wrong on something that logically seems like the right decision. But we have to test these things in a safe way, in a low-cost way. And then if we do multiple tests, you can find the one that works the best. And I think that was a perfect example maybe of where a large multinational isn't the best size to adopt circular economy, because a small cafe would have done that, would have seen it didn't work. The next month would have tried a different paper straw. They can iterate more quickly. I also think that in the past, a lot of the circular economy is just one way of achieving sustainability. It's like a subheading under sustainability. But the circular economy, it is... we often forget, how it impacts on the product or the service that the customer is going to use. Like I said, we can get lost in, saving energy and saving resource and all the rest. If it diminishes value for the customer, it's not sustainable from an economic point of view. And I think that's the bit that's really been explored the least. And so if somebody's designing a product or service and they want to make it more circular, I would be testing how it impacts on the customer experience the whole way through. And you'd be surprised. We assume customers like X, this is what they value of what we do. Like, for instance, I remember, and this is like a total aside, nothing to do with it, but it was like an ad for the Red Bin waste collection company, And the thing that their customers said they liked the most about having them as a bin collection service was the fact that the staff put the bins back beside their driveway.
Instead of halfway up the road.
Exactly. Like, you never know what your customer is going to value. Yeah. So I always think it's really important. You could change something that to you is insignificant and helps make it more circular, and yet to your customer, that was one of the things they liked the most about your product. Yeah. So I think it's really good to be examining quality things like that.
Yeah, and I love that, because that's, again, why we do this is for the customer, because the customer is always the one that loses out. It's like electric cars. There's so many brands coming out. We're great, look at me. But the customer's just bamboozled with information. It's like what we're talking about. So from the customer's point of view, you don't know, until you ask them, you don't know what they as you said, like in products or don't like in products.
Like, for instance, we have a Nissan Leaf, and actually very happy with the car, but one of the things that drives me crazy, and it was used in Ireland, we bought it second hand, is that the map defaults to the UK.
Oh, yeah.
And the sat-nav in the car is terrible. And so I love everything about it, but that is a bugbear in the car. So, and it's such a small thing, I think, that they could fix.
Yeah, but they do it in other brands that haven't come to Ireland. So at one stage you're I am here into the middle of the sea. They haven't hooked up into Ireland yet.
But it's a minor thing, but that would be a customer value point for me. That I know it doesn't connect to circularity, but I think companies have to be very careful that they don't
bypass the customer.
They just don't, or our product or our service is virtuous and good, and therefore we don't have to worry about this stuff. Yeah. You always need to worry about this stuff, and circularity can help you to be more economical and more profitable and safeguard your future, but don't lose sight of customer value.
Inclusive. Well, that's unbelievable, Elaine. I have to say thanks very much.
My pleasure.
So, the whole point is circular. Involve your customers, and I'll leave all Elaine's details under this video so you can get in touch with her, because I think you'll see her a lot now in the next years, because it's a massive part of what we all need to be doing. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.
Pleasure.
We'll see you soon. God bless.